Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Not Your Mama's podcast. The title of this episode is Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena, Analysis, Prediction, and Management of Human Affairs. In this episode, we are speaking with Mr. Jim Marshall, a polymathic scholar, an autodidact who is devoted over 50,000 hours to studying and practicing multiple dimensions of human development. Jim has integrated the best aspects of the most advanced techniques on the planet and expanded their limits by his own research and discovery. He has successfully treated and/or trained hundreds of clients for over 40 years. And this is the inventor of Septemics and several consciousness expanding systems, including multidimensional processing, conflict matrix processing, and the Tripartite Path to Human Development. His areas of expertise including psychology, philosophy, theology, parapsychology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, and music. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really excited to dive into this topic. It sounds like such an interesting book. Can you give the audience a little brief background about you and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, but before I do, I just want to clarify one thing. The word is autodidact.
Okay, thank you. I was having a struggle.
People will recognize the word.
Thank you so much.
Autodidact.
Thank you so much for correcting.
Okay, so I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown human phenomena, which is of people, from which I constructed a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics, which is published in the book you just referenced, Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena.
Mm-hmm. So what is Septemics? Can you break it down a little bit more for the audience to understand?
Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to humans occur in a sequence of 7 levels or sequences. In other words, there's a sequence there that creates a scale. And these are naturally occurring. And each scale breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps, which is why it's called Septemics. Mm-hmm. There are 35 such scales which span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any situation that a human being will get into will be addressed by one or more of these scales. It's universally applicable. There are 24 scales which apply primarily to individuals and 11 which apply primarily to groups.
So can you break down the 7 different levels of each scales and how to advance to the next level?
Okay, well, first of all, let me tell you in general about the subject. I wrote this book to help people. Mm-hmm. I had a long career as human development engineer, helping hundreds of people for many thousands of hours. And so now I'm going from helping people by the hundreds to helping people by the millions with this book. So I wrote this book because I discovered these new phenomena and I knew they would help. And I've had 26 years of observation that they do help people. Almost anybody who can read and wants to improve himself will get help from this book. Now, each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the individual, group, or activity moves persons or groups up these scales, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. More importantly, just finding out what level you are at on any scale is enlightening and beneficial. When you spot it, a light goes on above your head. Mm-hmm. And finally, once you know the actual level that a person is at, whether it's yourself or another, you can improve that person by moving them up one level at a time. So this is extremely user-friendly. All these advantages represent major steps forward for society. Each of these scales is an axis against which to evaluate human behavior. And combined, they empower one to understand, predict, and manage human affairs to a degree hitherto unattainable by most. And of course, each scale is unique. So you have to really look at the specific scales to see what the 7 levels are.
Yeah. So how is using Septemics improve like relationships and communication and work? How does that break down in the book?
Okay. The data in this book are vital for every human being and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier, wherever they are, by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. Mm-hmm. If you were to invite someone to a rendezvous, you would certainly tell him the exact location and perhaps also how to get there. Needless to say, it's very difficult to get somewhere if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get to your destination. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly. So much so that it's considered normal. Most people in most areas of their lives do not know where they are, where they're going, or how to get there. And this book solves that because I've discovered these naturally occurring phenomena. In other words, these scales are correct in the same way that the Pythagorean theorem is correct and the formula for the area of a circle is correct. They are axiomatically correct. Has nothing to do with me. I simply stumbled across them. There's no theory here. I discovered all this empirically as a result of my work over many decades with many clients of different types. And what happened was, as I was working with my clients, I started to notice that they would improve in ways that were predictable to me. Now, I never told this to anyone, but I made notes. Mm-hmm. And I started noticing after a while that my clients were actually moving up scale. So I would observe that a client was at a particular level in a particular scale. And so I would know that when he got better, he would go up to the next level. I would never tell this to anybody, but they did over and over and over. The clients gave me the scales. Wow. So by about 95, I had about 32 scales of varying lengths between 3 and 7. Okay. So I had one scale in particular that had 6 levels, which I absolutely knew from long experience and research was correct. In 95, I discovered that it had a 7th level. And when I inserted that 7th level into the 6th level scale, it manifested mathematically. Now, the whole point of mathematics is the implications. In other words, you start with a formula or an equation, and there are implications built into it, and you can adjust it. For example, that's how Einstein discovered the greatest formula in human history, E equals mc squared. This was done mathematically. So he derived it by manipulating the formulae until he got down to that earth-shaking formula, which completely changed the whole understanding of physics. So when I saw this, I realized that I was looking at natural law. I was looking at something that was inarguably true because all the implications mathematically jumped out at me. Mm-hmm. And I said, whoa, this is big. So then I asked myself, coming from an engineering background, I wonder how many of these other scales are actually 7-level scales which have not been developed all the way because I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and observing the data that fell out. Mm-hmm. So I looked at all these other scales. I had about 32 scales. And because I knew what I was looking for, it was very easy for me to find the remaining levels. And as each scale went to 7 levels, it manifested mathematically. So the mathematics is built into this in the same way that it's built into the Pythagorean theorem. Mm-hmm. It is some manifestation of natural law. And that is why this works. I already know from 26 years of experience with this that people look at it and they get it. They get it right away because it's natural law. You're telling them something that's inherently true, and so they get it. Yeah. So this is really user-friendly. So it helps people. Anybody who can read English reasonably well and wants to improve himself can do so using this book alone. So when I saw that I had all these 7-level scales and this was natural law, I realized this was a separate subject.
Mm-hmm.
And that this would help people. And so then I became interested in writing it into a book so that I could get it out to the people of Earth. So in December 95, the first transcript was written. And I gave it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees. And they were all very favorably impressed by it, all of them. So then I said, okay, this is what I think it is. And I started working on the book. I worked on it for 25 years.
Wow.
Now, the reason I worked on it for 25 years is first I had to discover the phenomena. That's what scientists do. They discover phenomena. Then once I had the phenomena, then I had to engineer that into a practical philosophic system. That's what engineers do. And then when I had that, then I had to express it in a way that would connect to the average reader. And that took a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you an example as to how and why. When Einstein released the general and specific theories of relativity, these were done in academic papers. He made no attempt to explain this to the general public. He was explaining it to other physicists and mathematicians, and he did so effectively. When Sir Isaac Newton, the father of physics, came up with the 3 laws of motion, they're fairly concise, but then he had to develop calculus in order to implement it. So he wrote a book famously called the Principia, in which he presents calculus. He wasn't writing that for the general public. He was presenting it to other mathematicians and physicians. I had a different challenge here. I have this scientific discovery, which developed into an engineering system, which I then had to explain in a way that the average person would get. And that took a massive amount of work. There were many rewrites. I put glossaries in the book in front of not only every chapter, even in front of the introduction, so that the terms are defined. For example, there's a scale of communication, very powerful scale. But if you look up the word communication, it has about 35 definitions.
Mm-hmm.
So a person would look at this and say, well, what definition is he referring to? And so I give a specific, concise definition of communication. So they know, okay, that's what he means. And then when they look at the scale, they get it right away. So each level of every scale is defined in the glossaries. So there's no mystery about this.
So is there like a quiz in there for someone to like figure out what scale they are actually at that moment? Like, can you explain a little bit how like the reader would understand where they would actually be starting at the scale they would be starting
Right.
at?
Okay, so here's the way it works. When a person has a situation, it doesn't matter what the context is, politics, career, romance, finances, health, business, whatever it is, he has a situation, okay? You look in the book and you look for a scale that's relevant. Now, I've already told you that there is going to be a relevant scale. In fact, in most cases, there are multiple relevant scales. For example, let's say a guy's having romance difficulties, right? Everybody has romance difficulty at some point. So there's the scale of relationships. There's the scale of permeation. Permeation is what creates love. There's the scale of allegiance. When relationships deteriorate, it's because allegiance deteriorated. There's the scale of sexuality. If you're not compatible on that scale, you're not going to be able to have a successful romantic relationship. I'm not saying you have to be at the same level, but you have to be at compatible levels. Okay. So right there, you just off the top of my head, the guy could look at any one of those 4 scales, and if assuming he understands it, he'll say, yeah, I can see I'm right here at level 6 or whatever the level is. He will get it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying he has to tell anybody this. He can keep it to himself. But once he knows he's at that level, meaning once you have the correct level, you can then move up to the next higher level, because that is the next thing up, necessarily, intrinsically. And so he will be able to do that. So you guarantee.
Hey friends, I hope you are enjoying this week's episode of Not Your Mama's podcast. This podcast would not be possible if it wasn't for the support of you, my wonderful community. To support Your Mama's podcast, please click the support link right down below and you can donate just as little as 99 cents. Also, follow me in the Shop Like to Know It app where you can follow me with all my exclusive content, all the way from baby products I love, fashion and style, and everything in between. Now let's get back to the episode. Yeah, I was just gonna do you break down how to move up to the next level? So let's say he's at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of, yes, there's a whole section in the book about that. And I can tell it to you, although I don't know if you want to spend all of our time doing it because it's fairly long, but there's a whole section in your introduction called How Can One Use Septemics to Improve Oneself and One's Life? Mm-hmm. And it tells you with specificity how to do it. First, you study the glossary, then you study the scale, you study the chapter, and then you find either your level or somebody else's level, depending on what applies. So let me give you an example. There's a scale of motivation. You can ask yourself, what's my motivation toward my girlfriend? What's my motivation toward my boss? What's my motivation toward my mother? And so forth. So you could use this scale of 30 or 40 or 50 different ways. Also, you could ask, what is my mother's motivation toward me? What is my father's motivation toward me? When you know somebody's motivation, that tells you an enormous amount about that person, because there are good motivations and bad motivations. There's a spectrum, right? There are 7 levels. Mm-hmm. There aren't a million motivations, which is what most people think. There's 7 basic motivations. So I've done the heavy lifting here of determining what these levels are. And I absolutely can guarantee the scales are correct. Now, some people might want to quibble with the words I use to describe it. For example, in the scale of sexuality, level 2, which is a very high level, most people never get to, is called take it or leave it. That communicates to people. People know what that means, take it or leave it. Mm-hmm. There are people who have a very high demeanor regarding sexuality. They can take it or leave it. I mean, if their girlfriend leaves them, that's okay. And if they find a new girlfriend, that's okay. And if they don't, that's okay too, because they can take it or leave it. Yeah. It's a very liberating place to be. Not many people ever get there. So that's what I called it, take it or leave it, because I want to communicate to the people. This is what this is about. And I did that with every level. Now, there are 35 scales, each of which has 7 levels. There's 245 different levels that had to be verified, explicated, and expressed. Mm-hmm. So I went through a lot of trouble in the book to write it in a way that people would get. And I know I succeeded because I see the results. Every day I talk to people who say, wow, I get this. This makes sense. Nobody who's ever read the book has said to me anything like, this doesn't make sense to me, I don't get it, or anything like that, because it's natural law. Like, I don't remember when I first learned the Pythagorean theorem. I was probably in grammar school, maybe 12 years old when I got it right away. You can see it's like axiomatically true. Mm-hmm. And I've been using it ever since. Or like the 3 laws of motion, it's the same thing. Once you read them, you can't not know them.
Exactly.
I mean, you can forget the verbiage, but it's axiomatic and you get it right away. So those things connect, and that's what the book is about, because I want to help people. Now, so basically, if you study these scales carefully and use them to resolve your confusions and dilemmas, your life will improve. The more carefully you study the scales and the more diligently and frequently you apply them, the more benefit you'll receive. So whenever a situation arises in your life, turn to the appropriate chapter and analyze the situation against the relevant scale. So what I tell everyone who asks me, my clients and my students and such, the way to use this is a textbook on a new subject. Mm-hmm. So you should study this the way you would study chemistry text, a physics text, a biology text, an economics text, and so forth. Start at the first line of page 1 and go through ploddingly, read all the glossaries, don't skip around, don't leave anything behind that you don't understand. And the book is very communicative. In other words, it's not hard to get this if you follow the instructions in the book, because I tell you how to study it, how to use the scales and so forth. Now, After you finish it, go back to the beginning, read it again, and when you get to each scale, find your level on every scale. By the time you get to the end, you will be a new person. Mm-hmm. Your life will have been demystified, clarified, because every time you find the level, it clarifies your life. For example, I talked about that 6-level scale that I found in 95 had a 7th level, which was really the beginning of Septemics. Mm-hmm. Well, that's called the scale of basic purposes. What's more important than knowing someone's basic purpose? That's what the person is about.
Yeah.
You see, everyone has thousands of purposes. I mean, if you say, I want to go out for a beer, that's a purpose, but it's not a basic purpose. There are only 7 basic purposes. Now, most people lead their entire lives at one level of the scale. It is possible to go up a level or down a level, but that's actually quite rare in the case of this scale. So you use this scale typically once. You find your level. Once you know your level, it dramatically clarifies your life. You know what you're about. You know what you're trying to do. Because you throw out the other 6 levels. You say, that's not for me, that's for other people. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because I've observed these people. So I know what they're about. So, for example, nothing that Donald Trump does surprises me because I know his basic purpose. I'm not going to tell anybody what it is because that would be unethical. But I know what it is. And so generally, I'm rarely surprised by anything anybody does at this point in my life because I know these skills. And when I look at people, in a matter of seconds, I can spot a person on a scale. Not necessarily every scale all at the same time because it depends on what they're manifesting. Like, for instance, the other day I was listening to some people talk. There's a scale of thought, okay? One of the levels is association. So these people were associating. So I thought, well, that's the level of thought they're at. I knew that just by hearing them.
Oh my God.
See?
I bet you it's all consuming.
It enables you.
Like every, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I just feel like you have like, it's almost like a Bible to life and how to achieve what you want. And, you know, just like all consuming, like, you're like, I know what this person's at. I know what that person's at. And I feel like if I were the book, I'd be the same way as you. I'm like, oh, this person's probably at this scale. And I'm so intrigued by it. I have to get my hands on this book because I'm always wondering about my purpose and what I'm, you know, meant to be doing or, you know, where I'm at in the relationship, et cetera. I'm always trying to find the answer. And I almost feel like your book has the answers.
This book would help you tremendously. Now, I've calculated that 57% of the human race wants to improve oneself or one's life, okay? The other 43 are like psychopaths, sociopaths, criminals, narcissists, crazy people, morons, idiots, you know, those people, they're not motivated to self-interest, you know, like if you take criminals like Al Capone or John Gotti, they would never have been interested in this book. They don't want to improve themselves. They just want more money, more Cadillacs, more sex, more alcohol, more drugs, you know. So but for someone like you will eat this book up. You will just gobble it right down because each of these 35 scales is expressed in what you might call a spreadsheet or a table. So people often ask me, well, what is this book like? And I have to tell them in all candor, there's never been a book like this before in human history. However, each of the 35 scales is very much like the periodic table of elements.
Okay.
Now, before Mendeleev invented the periodic table, there was chemistry, but he revolutionized it because he took all of the elements that were known at the time, put them on a piece of paper, a single piece of paper, in correct relationship to one another. And it brought order to the subject. So the whole world of chemistry and physics was dramatically improved. He made it much easier to learn, teach, and understand physical science. So as the generations went by, we've just kept adding elements as we discovered them into his formula. Okay, it's axiomatically true. The periodic table is a statement of natural law. Each one of these 35 scales is a periodic table for the corresponding area. Now, if you like, I can read you the names of the scales and you'll see what I mean by the corresponding area, because there are 35 areas each scale corresponds to. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, give me the names of the scales.
It doesn't take long.
Okay.
So these are the individual scales. They apply primarily to individuals. Okay. The scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And the group scales are the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Now, each of these scales is unique, but they sort of overlap. So that's what I mean when I say there's usually more than one scale that will help you resolve your situation.
Yeah, just going through that, I felt that like they definitely are overlapping scales and subjects for your life. And they're all like extremely great points of what you need to help improve, like the communication, right, physical fitness, everything you pretty much laid out. I need to get my hands on this book. So if you guys want to get a hold of this book, all of the information will be linked down below in the show notes. I think that it would be a great tool if anyone really trying to improve their lives. That's what we're about here on Not Your Mama's podcast, is how to improve yourself, ways to go after your goals. Real quick, before we end, I have 4 questions for you. Who and what inspires you?
Who and what? Well, I guess I would say helping people is what inspires me. I've had a life of helping people. I mean, I started out at 10 years old as an altar boy. I mean, in my 10-year-old mind, that's how I was helping people, So, and I've been doing that my whole life. So, and that's what motivated me to spend 25 years writing this book and motivating me to do all these interviews. I've done like about 80 interviews. So it's to get the book out so people can get it and help themselves, because I'm inspired when I help people. So all those years when I was working as human development engineer, a person would come in, he would have a good session. I knew I was helping him, and that's what motivated me to keep going. And that's why I wrote this book.
I love that. You have such a heart of gold. I love that. I love when people want to help inspire others. What is something you wished you knew when you were younger?
I wish I knew Septemics. When I was a kid, there was no Septemics, right? So I made the same stupid mistakes that everybody else makes.
Yeah.
Because
I wish I had the book when I was younger.
I got involved with people I never should have been involved with. And I know at this point in my life, that is not going to happen. I mean, I see people, I can spot a guy in seconds. This is not a guy, I know exactly what level he's at on a certain scale. Not going to deal with him. Have a nice day. Best of luck to you. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know from long experience and direct observation that this book, if you use it, will prevent catastrophes, disasters, bankruptcies, divorces, paternity suits, indictments, and every other bad thing that happens to people, because you are forewarned. You know what you're getting yourself into. You don't marry somebody and then 5 years later say, what did I do to myself?
Yeah.
You know ahead of time. Because you can take a person, and some of this is in the book, in the back of the book. You can do a complete analysis of a person against these 35 scales. And then you have a complete picture of who this person is. what their strong points are, what their weak points are, and some of the weak points you might say, well, I can cope with that. And other ones you might want to say, no, I'm not going to deal with that.
No, because you can't find
So
all these on a Google search.
Right.
So what's the essential part of your daily routine?
Meditation. I've been meditating my entire adult life. And typically I meditate every day for about an hour, except if there's a catastrophe of some kind. We actually did have a catastrophe here this week. I don't know if you know Arizona. Is a disaster zone. Yeah.
Was there like a flash flood?
Major.
Yeah, I've been
actually,
Las
it was worse
Vegas,
than that.
and
they
I think
call it
there
a
was some flash flooding
monsoon
here too.
Yeah, they call it a monsoon here, but we had 80-mile-an-hour winds. So, I couldn't even stay in my house because there was no power for 3 days. It's 110 degrees here in the summertime.
Yeah.
So I had to flee the city. I and about 40,000 other people had to flee the area. So obviously I missed some of my meditation. Not every day, but a couple of days, But if that doesn't happen, I'm going to meditate.
Yeah.
And it clarifies my mind I would say cumulatively, as the years have gone by, my mind has gotten clearer and clearer, and it has improved my perception. And that, combined with this book, enables me to really understand what's going on. I can look at a person and see who this person is, what this person is, and what they're about. Because whether they realize it or not, becomes right out of their mouths.
Yeah.
If you know this book and you listen to people and you observe them, they tell you their levels. It's not hard to find out. They tell you.
Yeah. And then my last question is the best advice you've ever received.
Well, I would have to say this is something that is not part of Septemics, but it's something I learned a long time ago, which is focus on the goals, not the barriers. Successful people do not focus on barriers. They focus on the goal. Like, let's say you take a professional baseball player, right? And he just struck out. He's facing the same pitcher. If he's still thinking, this guy's got a great curveball, he's got a terrific fastball, he beat me before. If he's thinking like that, he's not going to get hit. He has to completely put that out of his mind and focus on the goal, which is getting a hit.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an obvious example, but it's true across the spectrum. Successful people, Abraham Lincoln is a perfect example. He had unbelievable barriers. He was deluged with barriers for his entire presidency, but he focused on the goal, which was defeating the Confederacy and ending slavery. And he succeeded and preserving the Union. And he succeeded at that because he did not allow the barriers to deter him.
Yeah.
In today's America, most of the people, as far as I can see, especially young people, allow the barriers to stop them. 100%. They become victims. They say, well, I can't do this because I'm Jewish or I'm Black or I'm short or I'm fat or I don't have a college degree. That's focusing on the barriers.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln had at most 1 year of school, but he still became probably the best attorney in his state and one of the great geniuses of our country. If you read his writings, they're brilliant.
Yeah.
He wrote the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural address. So he did not focus on the barriers that he had.
Exactly. That's a great example. Jim, this was such a fruitful conversation. I wish we could continue talking about this more. If anyone is interested, like I said previously, all of his information is down below in the show notes. I highly recommend that you grab his book, Septemics. I know I'm definitely getting a copy of it. And Jim, thank you so much for coming on Not Your Mama's podcast. And everyone, I hope to see you in the next one.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Not Your Mama's podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one.